Hi, Misha here, and moving right along with the Century series of U.S. Air Force fighter bomber jets, interceptors. We have the Republic F105 Thunderchief. And I've kind of got a ghetto stop. This is kind of slick and it was wanting to slide. And I had some kind of adhesive Velcro, stuck it on there. If it works, I might make something a little more permanent and attractive, but just trying things out here, guys, to give you something a little better visuals while keeping my models from accidentally getting knocked over. Well, we're moving right along with the Century series, and the Thunderjet is one of the more famous and even infamous and also beloved. It certainly saw a lot more combat than some of the other Century series fighters, as it was used quite extensively and lost quite extensively in that hurt my hand more than the plane, in Vietnam. In case anyone was wondering, these fins are a little sharp. Ow. It's live on TV, guys. I was worried about hurting the plane. Didn't hurt the plane, hurt myself. Got right me into the quick. Sorry, I'll quit rambling. It's been a very long day and a very bizarre day. You ever have those days? Anywho, the Republic F105. This actually began as an internal project over at Republic. Originally, they had the F-84 Thunderjet, which had some pretty early success after the F-80 Shooting Star, but then the F-86 Sabre from North America came in and was just the ultimate jet. So the F-84 ended up being used as more of a strike fighter, a bomber, in Korea, and actually delivered a lot of ordnance during that war. So this project kind of began as an upgrade of the F-84F fighter bomber variant, and the Republic showed the initial plans to the Air Force, and they were interested in 52, and originally they were going to order some of the upgraded or new planes, but then the Korean War ended, and first they decreased and they canceled the order. However, in 1954, they had a renewed interest in an updated fighter bomber, especially one capable of carrying a nuclear weapon. And so, it was kind of started back up again with Republic. And they came up with the YF-105A, which first flew the original prototype in 1955, October. And lessons learned from flying that led to the YF-105B, which gave it the what is called the Wasp waisted fuselage, which was a real popular look, the whole aerial ruling thing that was very much in vogue in the mid-50s. They made other changes that basically increased its speed, altitude, performance. And the B version first flew as a prototype in 1956. But it had competition. and that would be the F107A from North American again. The same folks who brought us the P-51 Mustang in World War II and the F-86 Sabre. They too were going off lessons learned from Korea, and starting in 1953, they worked on an upgraded version of the F-100 Super Sabre, nicknamed the Super Sabre, also sometimes called the F-100A for the fighter variant, and F-100B for the fighter bomber variant. Well, the fighter variant really didn't ever go anywhere because the Air Force just didn't have a use for it. So they focused on the 100B, and enough changes were made and the Air Force decided it should be called the 107. And so 3 prototypes came from North American in 1956, and they flew from September through December of that year, and gave this plane here a run for its money. In fact, so much so that North American, having had success already multiple times, was kind of maybe jumping the gun a little bit. They felt they had a good plane, and the 105 here had some early teething problems. Very common, thing for the Century Series planes. They seemed like they all kind of weren't perfect. And so North America thought they had it, but in the end, by 1957, the Air Force declared the Republic F-105B the winner, and placed an order. These were accepted in 57, and the first planes would start to go into service in 1958, thereabouts. Like I said, this was a fighter bomber. And interestingly, early on, these were grounded for a brief period of time because of some issues, but also because they didn't have enough parts. They hadn't really caught up, so they had a rocky start. This is the 105D, which was an all-weather version, developed in 57 and introduced in 1959. This is the quintessential Thunderchief. It had an upgraded radar. It had an improved ejection seat. In the cockpit, they switched from dials and gauges to a tape display system. It was faster and easier for the pilot to read. And they made many other changes just to improve and update the design. It's also worth pointing out that really not long after this was adopted, again, it was meant to carry one tactical nuclear weapon in its belly. But it wasn't long before these started being used as a conventional bomber. And thankfully they were never used in the nuclear role in actual service. So what exactly did the Republic give the Air Force in the late 50s and early 60s? Well, let's dig in. When this plane was introduced, it was the largest, most massive single-seat, single-engine jet put into service anywhere in the world. It is long, at over 64 feet, has a wingspan of just shy of 35 feet. But really, that doesn't tell the whole story because it's thick. It's very tall. It has a lot of ground clearance. Very chunky fuselage. And that's because it has an internal bomb bay. It's just under 16 foot long, the bomb bay. And it's 32 inches by 32 inches. So, narrow, of course, but long enough for a nuclear weapon or conventional bombs, or, as is most commonly used, a fuel tank. They would usually just use the internal bay for fuel. This was designed originally as a tactical nuclear strike bomber. It was designed to fly in very low and very fast. So priority was on speed, and after the B version was introduced, the 105 could go about 2.1 Mach and had no problem cruising at Mach 2. It didn't have a especially high ceiling of about 48,500 feet, but it was sufficient for its purposes. And while it was fast, it wasn't especially maneuverable. On the other hand, pilots said it was actually a very smooth flying plane. Had good handling characteristics. It was smooth, just not especially maneuverable. It had an interesting nozzle in the back with the engine where the rear opened up kind of like a flower petal when an afterburn. In addition to the internal bomb bay, it had 5 hardpoints externally, 1 under the fuselage and 2 under each wing. The outer hardpoints could be used for AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles or bombs or rocket pods. The inner 2 hardpoints could be used for fuel tanks or bombs. And usually these would get loaded up with a lot of fuel and a lot of just, bombs. But they did have the Sidewinders, 2 of them for defense. These also had an M61A1 fast-firing Gatling cannon, 20mm, with over 1,000 rounds of ammunition. So that's pretty impressive. Cannon on board. The standard 105B and D had a single crew member. As for the C, it never went into production. It was planned to be a trainer. And there would be a 2-seat G version used as a wild weasel in Vietnam. Well, like I said, these were only really ever briefly used as nuclear deterrence bombers. It wasn't long before they were switched over to conventional. By 1961, that was what they were defined as. Also in 1961, these were first deployed overseas, over in West Germany with the whole Cold War tensions over the Berlin Wall and other factors. And at the same time, McNamara canceled all future orders of 105 Thunderchiefs, opting instead for more advanced jets. And that's not to say they quit making them in 1961. Obviously, outstanding contracts that had already been signed would still be fulfilled. To that end, these are still be coming off the production line until 1964. And by 64, the 105D, the all-weather version here, would completely eclipse the 105B and all the Bs would be retired out of active U.S. Air Force service. In that same year, these would first be deployed in the summer to Vietnam and be used as fighter bombers. And then in 1965, they would be used as strike bombers. And then in March of that year, quite famously, they were used very heavily in Operation Rolling Thunder. These would be credited with some air-to-air victories over MiGs, even though they weren't the best dogfighter in the world. But in April of that year, 2 or 3 105 Thunderchiefs, so supersonic, at the time modern jets, were shot down by subsonic MiG-17s, and this really pissed off General McConnell, Chief of the Air Force. And so that there's a nice, interesting story about all of that, showing how, frankly, outdated tech shot down what was at the time perceived to be cutting-edge American tech. Nevertheless, 105 Thunderchiefs were used very heavily in the first couple of years of Vietnam. They flew many sorties, bombing, strafing, and oftentimes they were escorted by F-100 Super Sabres. But these were the bombers because they had twice the bomb capacity, and they were faster and had better range. Interestingly, the Thunderchief could carry twice the tonnage of ordnance as an old B-17 from World War II. So even though it was a single-person jet, it could really lob some bombs. Unfortunately, these also had a very high attrition rate in Vietnam. Some were lost through accidents or, damage, mishaps. Those things happen in combat. But over 300 were shot down. In fact, of the 833 105s made, nearly 400 were lost in Vietnam, and of those, nearly 340 were lost to enemy fire, be it from MiGs or more often ground anti-aircraft. So much so that they had to actually pull these out of service. They started to scale back the use in 68, and by 70, most 105s were taken out of theater and replaced with F4s and later F111s. That said, the 105G Wild Weasel remained in theater till the end of the war. And what a Wild Weasel was, it was a two-person craft crewed by crazy people who would essentially fly ahead and tease SAM sites to shoot at them. And then other people would come around, or they would come back around and try to knock out the SAM sites. They were basically decoys, sitting ducks, or wild weasels. Other planes were like the F-100 had been used as a wild weasel before, but this was used more famously. And the F-4 would later be used as a wild weasel, so it wasn't exclusive to this critter, but it's pretty famous. This was nicknamed the Lead Sled, for its shape and bulk and ability to drop a bunch of lead on people. Or the Thud, probably the more famous name, which was kind of a, at first, derogatory and later affectionate name. And it was said the thud, of course, was from the thud of it hitting the ground. but in general, it's just a big, chunky plane. Well, the U.S. Air Force retired from active service their 105 Thunderchiefs after Vietnam. The Air Guard would fly them through the early 80s, and finally landing their last one for the last time in 1984. Like I said, they would produce these up to 64. They would build 833 total, with the D being the most prolific variant. This was a fast plane for its day and time. And it had a lot of interesting features, but it had also quite a few drawbacks because, again, it was originally meant to be a short duration, essentially one-time use, drop one nuke type strike bomber, and instead it was used in a rather different role in Vietnam, and it actually achieved some pretty admirable results. As for this Hobbymaster model, it is probably my heaviest one. You would think they might use kind of hollow metal. Oh no, this is solid. And it's most all metal. The wings are metal. The tail is metal. This is one of the versions that actually has a hinged cockpit. And it very kind of faithfully shows how spacious the cockpit was in these. The ordnance stays on very well. And they do on this something I really like. The center tank here, is it a tank or a bomb? I can't remember what they give. Maybe a bomb. Anywho, the center piece on the bottom here, they give you two of. One is standard. One actually has a slot cut in it, and it's hollow, where you can run the stand up through it and into the plane. So some of the earlier Hobby Masters, you had to decide, do you want to have the middle tank or missile or whatever, or do you want to put it on the stand? Or in some cases, the gun pod, like on the F4 Phantom. This doesn't make you choose. You just need to put on the right one for either stand or no stand, and you can display it either way. And I also like the stand on this one because the arm is metal, which really has to be because of how much weight this has to it. So it's an impressive looking plane. They also give you both nozzles, both cones for the back. I've got the one, closed in, but they do have the one that's opened up. If you prefer that look, you can pop it on. And of course, landing gear can be shown down if you wish. And the pilot can be taken out, and you can leave the canopy open. There's kind of an open detent you can leave it in, if you desire. So, this is definitely one of the cooler Hobby Masters. They did a good job with the plane. It's an interesting plane. And for anyone who's into Vietnam, this is definitely I'd say definitely up there with the F4 Phantom. It's just one of those iconic Vietnam War aircraft. And piloted by a bunch of brave people who would go out day in and day out knowing the odds weren't always in their favor. But they had a job and they did it. So this would definitely be one I would definitely give the thumbs up if you were interested in. And these are still available at places right now. A lot of other Century Series planes, like the 100 and the 101 and the 102 and 106, have already dried up. But you can still get the 104 and the 105. So they're still gettable. And as I kind of always remind you, if you are interested, if you would, if you'd like to go over to Pete's Collectibles, link in the description, and use product code Misha, M-I-S-H-A, you can use that to get 15% off and get reduced or free shipping. Funnily enough, I actually used the code myself tonight because there was he was doing a clearance sale, kind of one last of this or one last of that, and there was one last of something I wanted. And normally I just call him up, enjoy chatting with him, and just orders things over the phone because he kind of helps him with which paint scheme to get. But I figured, well, it's the evening. Tomorrow can be a long time off with only one left. Someone could hop on the site and buy it any time between then and... So I just thought I'd go ahead and buy it on the site for once. So I did use the code and it worked. Anywho, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you haven't, you might check out some of the other videos on the Century Series jets or other jets, or if that's not your cup of tea, maybe check out the main page over at Mishaco. Well, this is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.